Hey everyone, I am so excited to be here with all of you today. I see a lot of people from Texas, so very excited to have you here and be in the same time zone as me. It's very fun. But yeah, today we're going to be talking all about community first programming, which hopefully so many of us are already doing. But I really thought that this would be a good chance for just a brief refresher, but also maybe there's going to be something that you haven't thought of, a different perspective, different ideas. And so during our conversation today, I would absolutely love it if y'all stayed engaged in the conversation. Let me know, like, is this resonating with you? Do you have questions? I'm going to spend some time at the end asking questions, but if you've got any during the session, drop them in and I'm going to try and answer them throughout. But hopefully this is going to be super beneficial for y'all. So fingers crossed that the presentation is going to present like it's supposed to today. We'll see. But if you're okay with it, we'll just get started. So like I said, we're going to talk about community first programming and what that means. But first, just wanted to introduce myself. I know many of you, and I'm so thankful for that. For those of you who I do not know, my name is Katie Wright. I live over in currently Lubbock, Texas. That's West Texas. We are the home of tumbleweeds. If you've ever seen them in cartoons, I promise they do exist. It's a little crazy. I am also the community manager over at Sales Hacker. We have a community of about 25,000 B2B revenue professionals. So folks from individual contributors like salespeople, all the way up to revenue enablement, all the way up to CROs, which is just absolutely amazing. I also do community program consulting, and building super user programs is one of my favorite things. I'm currently getting my MBA from Texas Tech, so Reckham Tech. And I have 3 huskies and an absolutely amazing husband. So there's a lot going on all the time in my life. But really, what I want to talk about, and we'll just jump into everything, is we're going to talk about the different types of community programs. I'm going to try and give you some different perspectives and different buckets that you can put these programs in. We're also going to talk about how do we plan this with our community members, absolutely front of mind. And then finally, we're going to talk about what do we do now that we are starting to go back to in-person events? How do we make this transition super easy for our community members? How do we make this just enjoyable, not just for the members, but for ourselves that have to plan these events, and what that's going to look like? So what I really wanted to start off with is creating a baseline definition of what community programs do, what they are. And it was really tough for me. I thought I could just Google, how do you define community programs? And alas, it was it was nowhere near that easy. But what I did try and do was break down really understanding community and really understanding what programs look like in a community aspect. And so I came up with this definition. And what I created, and tell me if you like it, tell me if you don't, put in the chat what you think we should add or take away. But I say community programs are activities that drive a sense of fellowship with others through group events, shared experiences, and conversations. I think that this is a good definition. Obviously, I'm partial because it's my definition. But yeah, drop in the chat. What do you think? Do you agree, disagree? But I think kind of having this understanding of what community programs looks like will really set us up for our conversation today. So we're going to talk about the different types of community first programs. I wanted to kind of break these into 3 different buckets. The first one being educational. This is really where we host our workshops, our AMAs, which are Ask Me Anythings, where we bring in an industry professional and allow our community members to ask them anything about either a certain range of topics or literally anything. And that's just an amazing opportunity for our members to get an opportunity to kind of get a little glimpse into what these influencers and professionals' lives look like. We also have our webinars and our podcasts. So that really sits under the educational bucket. We also have social community programs. So those are our roundtables, our super user programs, our community leaders, geo-specific, right? So if I've got a group in London, our networking programs that we host. And then our third bucket is developmental. So we've got our mentoring, our courses, classes, certifications, stuff like that. Now, I know many of you are saying, well, a lot of these can kind of fit into multiple buckets. And I think the biggest differentiator is whenever we look at educational, that's really the program that's going to help our members right now where they're at. Social is more focused on networking, getting to know others, building that community relationship that we so strive for. And then developmental is really about building for the future. And I think that's the biggest thing is a lot of them overlap. And just like everything else in community, it all points to each other, right? You can't have educational without having a social aspect. You can't have developmental without having educational. But at the end of the day, they all come around to community, right? And so as we look at these three different buckets, it's so important to remember, how am I presenting these events to make sure that our community members are getting exactly what they need when they need it, and making sure it's what they want to have even, right? I mean, how many times have we said, let's do this program because a lot of people are doing this, and then we say, oh crap, this is not what our members wanted, let's pivot. We call it a test, right? And we go on to the next. And so I want to leave y'all with some questions today that you should be asking yourself, asking your team, keeping yourself and your team honest with each other and with your community. So I'm sticking with the theme of 3 in everything we talk about. So hopefully it'll be easy to remember. But the first thing to consider, are you talking with your community members? Are you having real conversations with them? Is this something, whenever you come up with this idea, is it being driven by community members? Conversation, by them asking for this? Is this something you're seeing and you're wanting to get a pulse on it? Do the right people in your community ask for this, right? Are we talking about people who are involved and engaged, or is this the random person that pops in once a year and says, this community should belong on Slack, when no one else has said that, right? Many of us who don't host on Slack, we get this question a lot, right? So really understand, are we having conversations with our members? Are we listening to them? It's not enough for us to just ask, but then what do we do with that information, right? Secondly, am I planning with my community in mind whenever I look through surveys? Whenever I ask my members through anonymous surveys, okay? Many of us send surveys in different capacities, whether it be post-event surveys. Many of you are probably going to get one after the session. Please rate it well if you feel like it is. But no, seriously, post-event surveys. Was it useful? Was it valuable to your community members? Was it the right type of medium for your members to receive that message? What does that look like? Similarly, many of us do like a state of community annual survey, figuring out what is a real pulse check on our community. Is it healthy? What does a healthiness look like? What does the relationship look like? I know so many of us, we're just having a conversation today in the CMX chat talking about building a sense of community survey. What does that look like? What are we trying to learn from it? What are we trying to get to help guide our future decisions, especially when planning community events? And then the last thing I would want to look at is who's managing our programs, who's moderating them, right? As community managers, many of us, myself included, are control freaks. And so we want to have our hands in everything. We want to be a part of every conversation. We want to know the ins and outs, and that can bode very well for us. But oftentimes when we're talking about our community first programs, who's hosting that? Who's moderating it? Who's guiding the conversation? What does that look like for you and your team? Hopefully some of these questions are getting you thinking right now. I don't know, maybe it's just me moderating. Maybe I'm not sending surveys, or I should be. Have I asked my community members if this program's what they even want? So hopefully you're having that conversation with yourself right now, because I wanted to just not share the great questions, but I wanted to show you what it looks like in real life. So this is a screenshot. I blurred out all the names, but I had launched a roundtable program and I thought it was going great. I had been to a few and I got this feedback that was really tough for me. And she's the community member, she sent it saying, hey, I love you guys, y'all. I love what Sales Hacker does. But this wasn't the best roundtable, and here's why. And that feedback completely revolutionized how we do our roundtables. And we have since completely changed platforms. We have added all new speakers and hosts for it from the community, people that wanted an opportunity to step up. And I think the most important part whenever we look at asking and having conversations is being willing to accept the feedback, positive or negative, right? Being willing to say, hey, I really appreciate what you have to say, and here's the changes I'm going to do. That is planning your programs with your community in mind. But then even going a step further, like I did, and I said, hey, I love this idea, love this feedback. Thank you, one, for being vulnerable and sharing that with me, because I know it can be tough. But two, would you be interested in leading one of these roundtables? What would you like to see done differently? Can you show me what that looks like? And asking and taking that information. With surveys, once again, you're really using these to understand what your members want. Was the event successful? How do we measure that? I think surveys are a really, really great tool. We have them in our onboarding sequence. We do them post-event sometimes. We're working on an annual one right now. But I think with surveys, you could do survey overload. Many of us, our LinkedIn feeds have been like poll overload lately. So just keep that in mind of, what are we going to ask? If we're asking people for their time, how much, how little, what does that look like? And just be really thoughtful about it too. Sometimes incentivizing for survey responses can be a helpful tactic too. But just kind of spend some time thinking about it. You don't need to just jump into surveys, but really be thoughtful with it and very intentional for what you're hoping to get out of it and what you're hoping to learn. So think about that whenever you are looking at surveys. And then the last thing that we had talked about was program moderation. So for me, I love whenever I have volunteers. Sometimes it can be tough to find them, but whenever we're planning community events, we want to have our hosts and our moderators very active in the community, right? So make sure that you are planning and giving them an opportunity. An amazing way to get community members involved in your events, in your roundtables, in your AMAs, in your workshops, whatever that looks like, is using your super users. This is a super easy hack, if you want to call it that, to give a reward for your super users, or what I call them, my community leaders. Thank you so much for being involved. Thank you for being engaged in the community. Would you be interested in this? Or even saying, hey, I know that we've talked about this. I have an opportunity. Would you be willing to come and participate in this? And it's amazing to see the response that you get. Think about in your own life how often you want to have that opportunity to get in front of people and you want to share about what you're so passionate about, right? This is an opportunity where you can easily do that, very, very low lift, for people in your community. And I promise you, it's going to come back tenfold, because they will remember it. They will share it on social. They will share with their friends and family. And one, it's just a good thing to do, but also it's going to really help your community as well. But in other aspects of it, not just, oh, I had someone fill this, but people are going to want to get more and more involved when they realize that they can have a platform to share what's important to them. So think about some of these tactics whenever you're starting to plan. So we've gone over a few questions. For me, I like to think almost in linear ways. Sometimes I'm very ADHD, but sometimes I have an organized thought. And so kind of wrapping up what we should be thinking about and considering, right? We've got our surveys, we've got our program moderation, we've got asking questions. Whenever we're thinking about planning programs, you need to kind of figure out, what do our members want, right? What type of program, what type of format do we want this in? Why are we doing this? Do the right people in our community, the ones that are involved, that want to help, that want to learn and grow, want to help move whatever your community's mission is forward, Are they wanting this? Are they going to be involved in this? And how are we going to add this program into our community ecosystem of events? But then also, what is that program going to add to our community? Right? So often we just do things because it just, like I said earlier, someone else did it, or you get these ideas. We all have these ideas of, oh, this would be really fun. And then whenever you take a second and you think of, what value does this bring to our community? What does this do for our community members? Does it align with our vision, mission, values? Sometimes the answer is no, and that's okay. So be thinking about these things as we're looking at our current programs that we have now, but then more importantly, as we're shifting to in-person events, right? So many of us are now figuring out, when do I host these events this year? Do I do it this year? How do I plan for what events are going to look like next year? So once again, sticking with threes, in-person events are here to stay. So my 3 big tips for y'all is: 1, plan. Those that know me really well know I am a planner. I like to plan things so far in advance. I'm working on MBA homework that's due in October already. So plan, plan, and plan. And planning can look a little bit differently. And one of the biggest suggestions I would have is, as you're looking at community programs, look at what you do virtually and start thinking about how you can switch it to be in person. A really good example is our online roundtables. How do we switch that to an in-person networking event? How do we take our AMAs with our influencers, our social heroes, whatever it is? How do we take those that have notoriously just been in our chat or our discussion board or video AMA and turn that into an in-person salon where they come in and speak for a little bit and then we have questions? What does that look like and where do we have it? Most importantly, talk to your members. Figure out who even wants to go to in-person events. Once again, you can throw this in your survey and get a really good gauge for your community, because what may work really well for one community may not always work well for yours, or maybe a portion of it will. So talk with your members as you're going through the planning phase. And I think the biggest thing to consider right now is think hybrid. How are you going to make sure that your members who want to be in person have that opportunity, but also your members that are more remote want to stay remote too, and have that opportunity to learn just as much as those that want to be in person? So we've talked about a lot. Thank you for sticking on this long. The most important takeaways I hope all of you are considering is that, 1, there's a lot of different types of programs, whether it be educational programs or social or developmental. You've got members at every stage of their career and of their life. And by offering these 3 buckets of programs, you're able to meet every single one of them where they need to be. And that's really going to help you long term. Secondly, you want to plan those strategies that help you understand what your community wants, how they want it, what it even looks like for them. So as you're building out these programs and creating those templates that you build into, think about that. Think about, how am I getting advice and feedback from my community, whether it be through conversations with your super users or talking with the most engaged or the least engaged members, figuring out why not they're involved, whether you're going in the surveys, right? Like figuring out what's important, getting a bigger picture of what that looks like. And then last but not least, getting proactive about planning hybrid events. Your community members will thank you for this, because once again, not everyone wants to be in person right now still. So what are you going to do to get ahead of it, be very thoughtful and intentional, and continue to have that community success? Big C with the overall community and little c with the relational community. So that is all that I have. My one shameless plug is come join the CMX Community Cafe. We host it the 3rd Tuesday of every month. It's pretty fun. And we just like to come, bring our problems, bring our goals, bring our suggestions, and share and help each other. And that is all that I really have. So I'm going to pop out of full screen here. And let's get into some questions, if that's okay with y'all.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, that was awesome. Definitely a lot of questions around surveys there, talking to those that maybe don't want to talk to you. So let's start with one here from Leslie. It's been a challenge getting unengaged members to complete surveys. I want to know why they don't want to be involved. Any thoughts on how to encourage responses from them?
Absolutely. So, unengaged members are always the most challenging. I think all of us can agree that those it's hard. How do you get in front of them? What does that look like? One of the things that's helped me, and I have to attribute this to Mary Green. She is now heading up the community over at Demand Base, and she really mentored me and helped me at Sales Hacker. But one of the campaigns almost that she would do is send like a re-engagement campaign, and it was as simple as, "Hey, it's been a while. How are you? What's happening in your life?" And I was amazed at the responses. And it would range from, "Oh, I just had a baby. My wife had a baby. We just moved. I just got a new job. I just haven't had time." Or this, and this is always really interesting, "What you're putting out is not as relevant in my current role." And I thought that was really interesting because in community, we see this a lot of members that kind of ebb and flow in and out. And for me, I'm like, oh, well, what would be interesting, right? So it's not just, "Hey, where are you?" But you've got to continue that relationship and you've got to do something special or different or creative. Even as simple as, "Hey, I'm so happy to hear that you just had a baby. I would love to send you an Uber Eats gift card with a meal. How can I help?" Little things like that, people just love because people don't get to hear enough of good things like that. So think about that a little bit.
Very nice. And following on surveys, one from Dara here. Can you share any resources or thoughts on crafting questions for surveys that will encourage useful feedback? This is a big challenge. You know, we're not all user researchers necessarily, and you want to cram too much into surveys. There was a
Mhm.
lot of chat there about crafting a good survey.
Yeah, that's an amazing question. Let me tell you, you are already in the right spot to find the best resources. CMX has an amazing plethora of resources that can help you. I believe they even have like examples of surveys that you can copy and paste and use. Feverbee also has great resources. Um, I was just writing an article for Crunchbase a couple weeks ago, and one of the things that has really got me interested is how do we relate numbers to emotions. And so like the sense of community index is something that's really helpful and has good questions. Sometimes it's a little, in my mind, a little dicey because it can be a lot to try and review. But yeah, CMX, Feverbee, and just looking at some other organizations might be a good thing. Also drop it in the CMX chat because I promise everyone's asking their communities these things.
Well, so we've been wrestling with sense of community index, and there is a lot
Mhm.
of questions. And actually, we decided to start with something very basic, just to give like a benchmark,
Yeah.
and then be a bit more targeted later on. And I think sometimes if it starts to get too complicated, you almost need to take a step back and decide whether it's really going to
Yeah.
be worth it. But you're asking a lot of people, right, to do that as well. So it's got to be worth the time. All right. So Kathy asks, and again, we're still on surveys, but how do you incentivize to get more responses to community surveys?
Well, I think it all depends on your community's budgets. So, I'm a sucker for swag. So anytime I get an email that says, "Want a swag? You want this?" So I'm a sucker for that. I will always do that. But not everyone will. Some people want different things. And so one thing that has worked really well for us is we'll do like a really big ticket item. So we'll say, "Hey, complete this survey. Your name will be in a raffle. 3 people will get $500 gift cards." Which, like, hey, that's pretty good in my mind. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. But if you don't have that, I would try and figure out, if you know your community really well, you may know that they like to talk with CEOs, or they want an opportunity to talk with someone that's like a hero for them, right? So try and figure out like, hey, if you do this, you'll be put in a raffle for this, and this, and the best response or the most upvotes or whatever you're trying to do, be like, you get to have a 15-minute coffee with our CEO. And that, for some companies, that's huge. So think about who your community is, because once again, that may not fly for everyone, but some of us nerdy folks, we would love that. So
Plenty of nerdy folks around here, I think. All right, but that's us at time, Katie. So yeah, really appreciate that. It was
Absolutely.
awesome. Lots of enthusiasm there. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming along, getting involved in the chat, and thanks once again, Katie. Yeah, everyone show your appreciation. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. I'm actually going to drop my LinkedIn in the chat. If you ever want to connect with me, if you ever want to get on a call, I love doing just random calls with folks. So you just give me a shout. And thank you so much. Thanks, Jamie. Appreciate y'all.
Thanks everyone. Okay, go and enjoy the next session. Thanks, Katie.
Bye, everyone.